So, fun fact about A24. Apparently, they started out with some seed money from an investment group called the Guggenheim Partners, who are also the owners of the Los Angeles Dodgers. So, this is my way of repping A24, is my A24 gear. Let's get into it. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I will be your host as we go through all of the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and notorious modern horror films. If you're new to the channel, I recommend you check out the introduction video. There's a link to it in the description below, and it gives you a pretty good sense of what the Horror Movie Syllabus is all about. Basically, we look at a particular subgenre of horror, and then we pick 3 movies from that subgenre to explore. Today, what we're looking at are movies from A24, horror movies from A24. And if you're unfamiliar with A24, it is a movie studio that both produces and distributes various movies that are usually of an art house nature, kind of a little bit more artsy, a little bit more original, maybe a little bit more off the mainstream path. And they've built a reputation for this, for quality movies that are original, interesting takes and not the standard Hollywood fare that you would see from the bigger studios. They've become pretty well known for this. They've got quite the reputation. They've got quite the fan base, and I'd count myself one of them. I am a fan of A24 movies, which is, like I said, not a controversial opinion or position to take, because we have a lot of people here who really love A24. And again, for good reason. The movies tend to be quality. They tend to be very good. They also, though, tend to be rather polarizing. There's a lot of people who don't like A24 movies. Either they don't like the whole studio as a whole, and they kind of think it's pretentious or something like that, or individual movies wind up being polarizing. They have an issue with it for one reason or another, whether it's the politics of it or the subject matter of it, or the way it's being told, the way the story's being done, whatever. There is some polarization when it comes to A24 movies, but like I said, I tend to fall on the side of liking them very, very much. And that's evidenced by how many of them we've already talked about on the channel. We've already talked about Hereditary and Midsommar and some of these other movies that you would just already expect to hear about in an A24 video. We've already talked about them. So we're going to have to dig a little bit deeper and a little bit more new to get into these movies. We have a lot of movies to talk about today that are really recent, because when I made the syllabus originally, I had picked a lot of A24 movies that you would kind of think were, noteworthy ones to talk about when you talk about A24 horror movies. I've already talked about them. And when I did the horror movie supplement and I decided to make an A24 video, I was like, oh, I've already used so many noteworthy movies from A24, but fortunately, there's still plenty more. And so I felt like this was still a good idea to do. I thought it'd be fun to do it. And like I said, I like A24 a lot. So I want to do it. I'm going to do it. One caveat. A24 does produce horror movies and also distributes horror movies, and sometimes does both. So we're not going to get too into the weeds on that, whether or not it's produced by A24 or whether it's distributed by A24. Either way, we're just going to call it an A24 movie. And I think you'll be able to roll with that. I think a lot of these movies get identified or known as A24 movies. So I don't think there should be a lot of controversy here. But just making that clear to everybody, we're just going to roll with A24 movies, whether it's just distribution or if they actually produced it. Either way, we're calling it A24 because these are the movies I feel like talking about, and they're good ones. They're good ones, and they're really interesting, challenging ones. Like I said, A24 has got this reputation for being very art house, very interesting, very original, and pushing the envelope, frankly, doing stuff that's off the beaten path, not mainstream. And so these movies can be challenging for a viewer. And that's, I think, how we're going to rank them today, undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate level, in increasing order of how challenging they are for the viewer, how hard of a watch it is, whether it's from scariness or unsettlingness or confusion. Whatever the case, that's the criteria we're using. I think that makes sense. It's a fun way to look at it. So that's the way we're going to look at them today. And yeah, I think we've got some really cool stuff to talk about today. Now, here's an interesting thing. I don't love all of these movies, so that'll be fun. Let's check these out. Let's get into A24 horror movies. The first A24 movie that we're going to talk about today, the undergraduate level selection, is Talk to Me. Talk to Me came out in 2022 and is an Australian movie by directors Danny and Michael Philippou, who, from my research, says this is their feature debut. for both of them. And it's a pretty strong debut for a lot of reasons that we're going to get into, but it's really interesting to watch this movie and realize that these are first-time feature film directors. It's pretty impressive to know that, because the movie has a lot of style, a lot of things going for it, and some detriments. But like I said, we're going to dig into all that in just a second. First, if you haven't seen it before, the movie is about a group of friends who do a party game with this mysterious embalmed hand that has magical abilities or something, psychic abilities, medium type abilities, where if they hold on to it and speak the words, they can commune with the dead. But they have to only do it for a limited amount of time. Otherwise, the dead will want to stay, will want to inhabit their body, and hijinks will abound. And of course, hijinks do abound in this movie because somebody breaks the rules, things go wrong, and things get pretty messy pretty fast. And I'll stop there so as to not spoil the movie for people who haven't seen it, but a lot of you probably did. This movie was a very big commercial and critical success. This movie had a lot of positive buzz. People really flipped their wigs for this movie. They were really excited about this movie. And so, as usual, I always get to the party a little bit late. That's just kind of how Professor rolls. I don't necessarily see movies right. I've been trying to change that a little bit lately, but I've been coming to movies a little bit late. So I usually come in after the hype kind of hits. And so it kind of changes expectations a little bit. And that is going to maybe color a little bit how I feel about this movie, because, well, let's start with the positive stuff. First of all, it's a really strong premise. It's a really cool setup. The idea of this hand, these kids playing this party game with his hands, it's kind of like a Ouija board, but like way more cinematically cool and way more intriguing because you don't know the stories behind it. And the rules are fairly simple to follow, so you understand how the game works. You understand the appeal, the social media appeal of it. You have these characters that are not necessarily always the most likable characters, but enough that you can identify with them and click with them and care about them enough so that you are worried about what they're messing with. All a very good setup. Also, the movie shot extremely well. They really know, these new directors, these first-time directors, are really nailing the tone of this movie. The vibe is good in this movie. It really is giving you great horror vibes. It's setting up a really strong premise and setting up kind of a little bit of a mystery and a little bit of a, what's going to happen next kind of thing that makes for a really compelling movie. And I think everybody really bought into that. The practical effects, the gore effects, stuff like that are really compelling. The cast is very solid. Everybody's very good in the movie. It's all working really, really well. But then for me, and I'm probably in the minority on this, it loses its thread a little bit. Somewhere about 2/3 of the way through the movie, the storyline kind of goes a direction that I guess I wasn't expecting it, but it didn't really hold on to me. Like, this movie gripped me early on, and I think it did for most people too. And I think for most people, it held on to them for the entire movie. For me, it lost me a little bit. It let loose a little bit for me at some point, where the movie started to feel a little bit rote, a little bit of a supernatural, ghost movie basically. And I was just kind of like, all right. This movie started out really strong, and now it's kind of losing me. But then it finished strong. It finished really strong. The ending is really, really, really good. So overall, the movie pulls it out for me. And for most people, I don't even think other people had this issue with a little bit of a lull or a little bit of a loss of tension, the final act, or like right before the final act. So it might just be me, because everybody else seems to really like this movie. Like the critics love it. It did really great box office. I personally feel it's slightly overrated, but not so overrated that it doesn't actually deserve a spot here. A, because of its reputation. It's got a very strong reputation. And B, because it still manages to be very, very good. Even though, like I said, at some point it loses the tension a little bit. It slides into a little bit of exposition that's a little bit clunky, which, is not unique. A lot of horror movies do that, and you can just kind of roll with it. And I roll with it enough because the movie's good enough to give it a pass on that stuff. So Talk to Me is definitely one that I think people really talk about. It's one that apparently is going to be getting a franchise. I'm not so sure we need a franchise. I think that might be a mistake. I think it's going to be diminishing returns for sure. But it's popular enough to get a franchise, which means it's going to be probably popular enough to be on the horror movie syllabus. So we're putting it on here. We're talking about it. And I'm guessing many of you, if not all of you, have seen this movie. And if you haven't seen it, I definitely do recommend you check it out. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Did anybody else feel like it kind of lost some tension at some point in the movie? That it kind of eased up a little bit? I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but I have a feeling maybe some other people probably felt the same way. Let me know about it in the comments below, because I love when other people agree with me. All right, we'll talk about that in the comments below. The next A24 movie we're talking about today, the graduate level selection, is Pearl. Pearl came out in 2022 and is directed by Ty West, and we love Ty West here at the Horror Movie Syllabus. We talk about all of his movies, so you knew I was going to probably come up with this one sooner or later, and here's where I'm doing it. And this one is actually a prequel to his movie X that we did talk about previously on the Slasher Icon doctorate level video. And, we loved X, we love Pearl, so we're going to dig into Pearl right now. If you haven't seen it before, the movie is, like I said, a prequel to the movie X, and it follows the character of Pearl, who was in the movie X, and it shows her as a young girl in 1918, and the movie is shot in this Technicolor Wizard of Oz-esque kind of early Hollywood style, and it follows this girl who's got some emotional issues and maybe some mental health issues, who really wants to be a star, but her overbearing mother is going to keep her on the farm no matter what, and hijinks abound as she tries to break free and live her life and chase her stardom and try to be who she actually authentically is. And I'm spinning this in a really bizarre way because it's kind of a bizarre movie. I don't want to spoil too much of it, but as a prequel to X, you kind of already know where this movie's going. From the poster alone, you kind of know where this movie is going, but that's part of what makes it interesting. The movie wants you to look at Pearl as the protagonist, or at least it feels to me like it wants you to sympathize with Pearl. But you know what she is. You know what her issues are. You know what she's going to do in the future. And so it's an interesting thing to try to make Pearl likable, but also make her very unrelatable. You can see early on how unstable she is, but she is your protagonist. She is your main character, and the other people around her mostly are not great, or you're suspicious of them. You're expecting bad things. So it's really interesting that they've set this up in a way so that Pearl is the focal point, and that it's like they don't actually try to make you feel sympathetic towards her, I think, but it's like your instinct is to feel sympathetic to her, but then they keep doing things to make you not feel sympathetic with her. It's a really interesting dichotomy. And I say they because Ty West and Mia Goth put this one together themselves. They co-wrote this. Mia Goth taking the lead for Pearl, who plays Pearl. And she really took ownership of the character and the story, and it pays off. She's great in X, but she's even better here. Her performance here is outstanding, and it's the strongest part of the movie, most likely, that she's giving this performance that is gangbusters. And the fact that she didn't get nominated for Academy Award is a crime, and it's indicative of the industry's bias against horror movies, frankly. Mia Goth is so good. The end credit last shot alone should have gotten her an Oscar. It's that good. There's, of course, that noteworthy monologue that everybody likes to talk about, where she goes like uncut for like 6 minutes, giving this monologue that is deeply disturbing. Just an incredible performance. So good. And everybody else in the movie is matching her. The woman playing her mother in particular, fantastic. Really great job by everybody to bring this movie together that is very surreal and yet still somehow feels grounded. And I tip my hat to Ty West. His whole thing that he likes to make what I call period movies, where he doesn't just set the movie in a period, but he films it like it was made in that period. He tries to do like an homage to the filmmaking techniques and style and look of that period, and he's doing that here. There's a definite, clear Wizard of Oz homage to this in the aesthetic, the appearance, in the character of Pearl as kind of a Dorothy. The scarecrow scene, good Lord, you're not prepared for the scarecrow scene. It's a real bastardization of Wizard of Oz, and I love that movie. We've talked about that on the channel too, strangely. The movie is really doing this homage, but it's also its own thing. It never forgets what it is and how sinister it is and how dark it is, but it's giving you this veneer, this sheen of happy, bright colors, and really light, daytime scenes, and it's really aesthetically like doing the opposite or contradicting what the themes of the movie are and what the subject matter is brilliantly. And this is one of the things that Ty West is great at. This is why he's such a great director. This is why I love his movies. And I did some research on the movie for the video. He was talking about how X was supposed to be kind of an indication of like the influence of indie filmmaking on society, and Pearl is more of an indication of the Hollywood influence on movie making on society. I don't know that I see that. I'll be honest with you. I don't really necessarily embrace that specifically, but I do feel like he's done a very good job of capturing and invoking that old Hollywood feel, and then putting this very modern spin into it, this horror a spin on it that is absolutely fantastic. And I'm not alone in this. The critics love this movie. It's a hit as far as these indies hits can go, I suppose. It really got a lot of buzz, but the critics absolutely loved it. And it's popular enough to be getting a third movie in the series, Maxine, which as of the time of this recording has not yet come out, but it's going to be set in the 80s, so I'm super hyped for that one. It's really going to be interesting to see that one because the idea of the first two, X and Pearl, is that they both operate as standalone individual movies, but they also enhance each other if you watch them both. And I agree with that. I think that works out well. And I'm expecting that Maxine will follow suit. It'll be its own standalone movie, but also enhanceable by what has come before. I'm very much looking forward to that. I'm always looking forward to a Ty West movie. I'm looking forward now to anything Mia Goth does because she's brilliant. And this movie is a trip of a ride. This is a challenging one, like I said, because you've got a main character that is not a likable main character, but you're also kind of forced to go with her, and you really just want everything to be okay, but you know it's not going to be okay. And Mia Goth's performance is just going to hook you in and keep you captivated. But if you haven't seen it, I definitely recommend you check it out. Again, it might be a little bit challenging for some people, but it's worth the ride. And I would recommend watching X first. You don't have to, but I recommend watching X first because it's a great movie, and I do think that they enhance each other. So Pearl, definitely one to check out. You knew it was going to be on the syllabus. Here it is. Let me know what you guys think of it in the comments below. And the last A24 movie we're looking at today, the postgraduate level selection, is Climax. Climax came out in 2018 and is a Gaspar Noé movie. And we have talked about Gaspar Noé movies in the past here on the syllabus, specifically with Irreversible. And they are always challenging movies. Gaspar Noé is a confrontational film director, and his movies can be extremely challenging, and that's probably putting it a little bit mildly. Irreversible is definitely not for the faint of heart, and arguably neither is Climax, but we're going to get into that in just a second. First, if you haven't seen it before, the movie is about a French dance troupe in 1996 that is celebrating the rehearsals for a big dance performance, and they have a party, after party, and during the party somebody spikes the punch with LSD, which makes everybody just go a little bit nuts. People start acting very strange. They act hypersexual, confrontational, and ultimately violent and dangerous as the night goes on, and everybody's trapped in this wintry, enclosed school where everybody's starting to act out and go crazy, and it gets more and more insane and just descends into madness. And hijinks abound, and we'll just stop there so as to not spoil it for you, because it would be hard to anyways. It's hard to explain everything that's happening in this movie. And like I said, it's Gaspar Noé, and if you know who he is and you're familiar with his work, you know what you're in for here. And part of what you're in for is just beautiful camera work, beautiful looking movie. He does these things with the camera, these camera tricks that are fascinating, and they really do convey the feel of the movie and what's going on. And the Climax is very well known for doing some really long takes, really long shots where the actor, the camera's moving around, going through the entire space, which is a very large space, and everybody's just kind of working and doing their thing, and the camera's following it on, moving from action to action, uncut. And it's astounding. It's really, really great. And part of why this worked so well is that he hired dancers who didn't really have acting experience for the most part, with the exception of Sofia Boutella, who's probably, if there's a main character, it's her, I guess. And there's like one other actor in there who's an actor. Everybody else was not really an experienced actor. They were dancers. And it shows. The dancing in the movie is fantastic. But the non-actors were given a lot of license to improv. The script was very loose, and they were told to kind of flesh out their characters and flesh out the scenarios and kind of improv them. And that paid off. And it paid off in working through these long shots and everything, because you didn't have to worry about people remembering their lines. They were acting naturally. They were having these interactions, these relationships play out naturally. And it works. These non-actors, by and large, come off fairly authentic. There's some performances that maybe are stronger than others. Some of them are maybe not perfect, but overall, I think they come off very naturally, believable, and good. And their dancing is on point. They start out with an opening dance number. It's absolutely fantastic. It's really great. This is not a musical or anything like that. But if you like dance, and I do like dance, I don't like musicals, but I do like dance. The dancing in this movie is great. They are really, really good. And again, a long uncut dance scene, it's fantastic. It really is great. Gaspar Noé is filming the hell out of this movie, and he's lighting the hell out of this movie. Like the way that the room's lighting changes the different rooms are lit differently, and how he goes from room to room in one take, and the lighting changes, and it just works, and everybody's finding their light right. It's just really, really well made. And this is, to me, maybe one of the more understated things about Noe is people talk about how crazy and insane his movies are, but they don't always talk about the filmmaking. The filmmaking is really top notch because he doesn't just do these gimmicky things to be gimmicky and impress. He does it to feed into the tone of the movie, the thing that he's trying to talk about, the themes. This movie is all about a bunch of people who get drugged and go insane. They slip into madness, and the movie's camera work enhances that. The color schemes of the different lighting enhance that. The long takes build up that anxiety and make you feel just really tense and uncomfortable. And then when the screaming starts, it's really unsettling. It's deeply unsettling. And the whole crazy thing with all the violence that's happening and the crazy sexual stuff that's happening and all the madness that's happening, it's nuts. You feel like you're descending into hell. And he conveys that through filmmaking, through letting these performers do their thing, and by just being crazy and mad. Like this movie's plot, such as it is, it's like a bunch of interpersonal relationships that don't really feed out, or play out really well. I don't know that it's the most satisfying of movies ending wise because again, the plot is messy at best. It's kind of like ad hoc and on the fly because of the way he made the movie. But it's the filmmaking and the performances and that tone, that unsettling tone, is what brings this movie home, and I love it. I love it. This movie just puts me on edge. Now, I want to be clear. A lot of people talk about Climax and how the violence is so crazy and how it's like just the sex is crazy and it's just like really a nuts movie. And I think it's a little overstated. It's true, but if you're thinking like Irreversible and you're thinking that Climax is going to be as disturbing and unsettling as Irreversible, it's not. It's not nearly as dark and upsetting and disturbing as Irreversible. But it's still dark and unsettling and disturbing. I don't want to undersell it either. I don't want to oversell it, but I don't want to undersell it. It's a pretty messed up movie, but I think it'll depend kind of on your threshold. If your threshold is that Irreversible is too much for you, Climax might be too much for you too. But if you think that Irreversible is a good movie and you can roll with that, then you can definitely roll with Climax as well. I think that's probably the best way I can give you a litmus test for it. But it's very much a Noe film. And if you understand Noe, if you've seen his movies, you know what I'm talking about. You've also probably already seen this movie. And maybe you agree with me. Is the violence and the sex and everything a little overstated, overrated, overblown? Or is it, or am I underselling it? Am I cutting it a little too short here? Let me know in the comments if you think that I'm maybe not giving this movie enough credit for the insanity. But I want to be clear, I am saying the movie goes insane, and largely just from the direction. The direction is astounding. The stories are astounding, but the actual stuff that's happening on screen is not as shocking as something like an Irreversible. So if that gives you any peace of mind to checking it out, there you go. You could also always look it up and see what the specific things that happen in the movie are, but I don't think any of them is going to be too insane. But that's just my thoughts. Let me know if you agree in the comments below, because this is a controversial movie that maybe doesn't need to be as controversial as it is, but it is nuts. It is a wild experience and a challenging film to watch for sure. So that's going to do it for our selections for the A24 horror movies, but I've got, of course, a few extra credit movies for you here. A24 just makes so many good movies that it's very easy to come up with some extra credit selections as well. The first one we're going to talk about is Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. Bodies, Bodies, Bodies came out in 2022 and got a lot of buzz when it came out. That movie was really hyped up. People were talking about it quite a bit, and it was really one of the more divisive movies that we're going to talk about. There was a lot of people who loved it, a lot of people who hated it. It really did not, go quietly. This movie had a lot of people talking about it, for better and for worse, really, but we're going to get into that in just a second. First, if you haven't seen it before, the movie is about a group of friends that gather at one of their friends' mansions to wait out a hurricane. And during the storm, they decide to play a game called Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. It's like a murder mystery type game. Only somebody winds up actually dead, and it causes a mystery of, is there a killer in the house? Is the killer amongst them? And the whole group of friends devolves into a lot of bickering and finger pointing and infighting, and hijinks abound, of course, as they do. But we'll stop there so as to not spoil the movie for anybody. But the movie really did have a lot of hype. It had a lot of buzz, primarily because of the cast. And not so much who the cast were, but the fact that the cast was a very Gen Z cast. And that was the thing that got talked about a lot in this movie, was how Gen Z it is and how the way these Gen Zers talk and how they relate to one another and the different buzzwords and the relationship with social media and all that, and how it was kind of a parody of Gen Z, but it was also highly representative of Gen Z. And I saw a lot of weird things about this. Like people would say, oh, it's mocking Gen Z, or it's satiring Gen Z. And then people saying, no, it's actually just giving a very accurate reflection of Gen Z. And then people say, no, it's a commentary on Gen Z and their relationship to things like pop culture, social media, things like that. And I think all of this is true, actually. But it's interesting because people liked and disliked it for the same reasons. You know, there were Gen Z people who liked it, thought it was, kind of their kind of movie. It's like showing them. And there's Gen Z people who thought it was kind of like making fun of them. And I think, frankly, both are true. And then there are people who were older, millennials, Gen X, maybe even boomers, who were watching the movie kind of like loving it because it's sticking it to Gen Z and mocking them. And also people who couldn't relate to it because it was so Gen Z and they didn't understand what was going on. So it's weird how this movie had like everybody having opinions on it. And those opinions kind of overlapped in weird sorts of ways. And it's fascinating to see how that shook out. And like I said, this cast is a noteworthy cast, but probably not really necessarily a cast that's going to, bring them into the theater necessarily. It's not a bunch of famous people. You had Pete Davidson, who's very polarizing in and of himself. Amanda Stenberg, who's the star of the show, or one of the stars of the movie, and she's on The Acolyte now, the Star Wars show. So that's got my attention, of course. Lee Pace, who I think is miscast but very good in the movie. He's just a little old, and they kind of talk about that, but it's kind of weird. Maria Baklava, who's an Academy Award nominee actually for the Borat movie. It's got a really strong cast of characters, and they are selling it. They are 100% committing to their roles, but they're all super annoying. And I think that's the point. I think that's why I think that it really is trying to satirize Gen Z. They're trying to make these people unlikable and grating on purpose. I'm convinced of it. And it works. It almost works a little too well. I don't love this movie. I've kind of fallen in the camp of people who thought it was overrated and didn't love it. I didn't hate it. And a lot of people really hate this movie. I didn't hate it, but I wanted it to be more than it was. It's kind of got this ironic twist of an ending kind of thing. That twist is not really the right word, but the ending for me was a little unsatisfying. It's funny, but I kind of would have gone for more serious than funny at that point. But the movie is funny, but it's also kind of grating. And it's a weird balance that for me, like I said, I did not hate it. I would rewatch it. I did rewatch it for this video, but I don't revisit it a lot. It's not going to be a favorite of mine. But for some people, it is. Some people really, really love it. Other people, not so much. And there are things that I think could have been done better. Like the setting is used rather well. It's one setting, and it's kind of got this claustrophobic feel, but even though it's a big space, they use the setting well. It's directed pretty solidly. The performances are good. They're just annoying, but they're supposed to be annoying. I think I just would have had some story elements work out a little bit better. There's a lot of drama in there. It kind of feels very reality TV-ish, and I think that's intentional, but I don't love reality TV. So for me, that's where I would kind of maybe have tightened it up a little bit and focused a little bit more on the mystery aspect of it rather than into the infighting, the Real Housewives style drama of it. But I might be in the minority in that. I think a lot of people really gravitate towards the movie for that reason. Are you one of them? Did you gravitate towards this movie? Did you like this movie for that drama, for the grating Gen Z speak, or do you hate it for that reason? I'd be curious to know what you guys think about this in the comments below because, like I said, divisive movie, wildly mixed opinions, but that's the kind of thing that makes it on the horror movie syllabus, at least as an extra credit. I couldn't, in good conscience, put it on there for a pick because I don't love it. But I do think it had to be talked about, it had to be mentioned, so we mentioned it here. Let me know what you think. The next extra credit movie we're going to talk about today is Men. And Men came out in 2022 as well, and it is an Alex Garland movie. And if you know Alex Garland, he makes some real thinkers. He makes some really thought-provoking movies. We've talked about him about a bit on this channel, and we probably will talk about him in the future. He's made movies like Ex Machina and Annihilation, and he's a really good writer. He does some really challenging stuff, and this is probably one of them, and also very divisive, kind of like Bodies, maybe even more divisive than that, frankly. But we're going to get into that in just a second. First, if you haven't seen it before, the story is about a woman whose husband has died, and she is grieving, and she goes off to the countryside, gets an Airbnb in the countryside to kind of go through the grieving process and get some alone time. And she keeps encountering various men who approach her in different ways and are always kind of unsettling in different ways and really just not approaching her in the right way. And then things start to get really weird and uncomfortable. There's a man who's kind of stalking her or seems to be stalking her, and I think people are not taking her seriously, not helping her. And then the hijinks start to abound, and then they really start abounding. It gets really weird. But we're going to stop there so as to not spoil it too much. But this movie is incredibly well made. Right off the bat, we have to talk about it's a gorgeous movie, both in terms of how it's shot and in terms of the location. The location is beautiful, and the use of color in this movie in particular is outstanding. Like, I'm not a big color theory person in the sense I'm not really that well educated on color theory. I know some basics about it, but you can tell that they're playing color theory out really strongly here. They've got some really strong performances. More on that in a second. But the movie looks great and it's directed very well. And it does a really good job of building up the tension, building up the dread, making you feel like this secluded, idyllic place starts to feel foreboding, starts to feel creepy. That tunnel scene in particular, really, really great, intense scene. Like, it's just really making for a really uncomfortable feeling. And I think that it wants to ride that uncomfortable line for a long time until it goes nuts. And it does. It does that very successfully. I think from a filmmaking standpoint, this movie's a win. Where we get into a little bit of trouble or problems for people is in the messaging. It's kind of got a heavy commentary. You could guess by calling it Men that it was going to be a bit of a social commentary movie, and it is. And it's made by a man, written by a man. So there's a lot of problems right off the bat with that. The movie winds up being a mixed bag in terms of commentary. It winds up being a little bit messy. The message feels at the same time both trite and convoluted. It's a little bit all over the place. It's a little bit unclear, and it's not super revelatory or impressive in that sense. So if you're looking at it from a political / social commentary standpoint, you're going to probably have some problems with that. I don't care. I don't care that the social commentary message it's not so intrusive to me that it takes away from the enjoyment of the movie. More on that in a second. But I can see why for some people it would. I think a lot of people went in there expecting social commentary, expecting to see something like that, challenging their minds in that way. And it winds up being messy. There's no other way to say it. Messy. It's not a clear message. It's not a very strong message. And it's a kind of obvious message. So yeah, it kind of fails on that regard. I guess I just don't care because I'm not here for the message. I'm here for the movie and the hijinks. And on that, I think it's delivering. However, there was a decision made to have Rory Kinnear play pretty much every man in the movie, including a child, by using CGI to put his face on a child. It's really creepy. And it winds up being very distracting. Like, Rory Kinnear gives a very good performance in all the different roles that he's playing. He's very charming as the main guy that's like renting out the Airbnb, and he's various levels of sinister for the various different men that he's playing. But it's distracting. The idea of using him for all the different roles, I get what they're kind of saying in terms of like all men are the same and kind of thing. Again, kind of a trite message, and I'd rather they've just cast different men and not gothic. It was just distracting. It takes away from the message because it's distracting, and it definitely took away from the movie for me because at first I was like, is that the same guy? And then I'm like, oh yeah, it's definitely the same guy, and it's just distracting. And I would rather have just seen them cast different people for the different roles and get away from that gimmick. It felt gimmicky, and I wasn't into that. So even though the performances are great, it really shouldn't have been done that way. I wouldn't have done it that way. I wouldn't have. That's where the message did become intrusive for me. That's where the social commentary was trying a little too hard, getting a little clunky and ham-fisted, and kind of forcing itself into the movie in a way that distracted me from it, and so that kind of took away from it. But then the movie goes real nuts. And I'm not going to spoil it for you, but it goes really nuts. And that's the stuff that when people talk about this movie and they're talking about like, oh, this is what they're talking about. They're talking about the really nuts stuff that happens at the end. And I love that stuff. That's Alex Garland getting weird like he likes to get sometimes. Digging that. Really into that. However, all this allegorical social commentary stuff, the weird stuff at the end, even the weird stuff at the end that I like, I would have rather have focused on the story of the woman dealing with the trauma of her dead husband and all of the weird intricacies of their relationship that are playing out and getting told and revealed throughout the movie. That stuff is by far the best part of the movie. And I would have liked to have seen that focused on more. I would have liked to have seen her journey of healing and processing the grief and the different opinions that people have about how she's approaching that and her relationship. That stuff was strong. I would have actually kind of rather this been a straight drama with maybe just some horror elements, like a horror drama maybe, than what we got. And again, like a lot of the movies, I didn't even mention this earlier, but a lot of the movies we're talking about today, the horror elements, how horror is it? Debatable. Don't care. It's my channel. We're calling it all horror. You know how I am. But this one, I kind of felt like maybe dialed down some of the creepy stuff, like Rory Kinnear playing all the little roles, even the creepy stuff at the end, the weird, gross stuff, and just focus on the drama because you had some real strong drama. You had some strong acting going on, and it's a really interesting premise from a dramatic standpoint that kind of gets lost by the end of the movie, unfortunately. But I loved that stuff. Overall, I wind up liking Men, but I see the movie that it could have been that would have been like a fantastic movie, like Alex Garland's best movie. It is not his best movie, not even close at this point, but it missed the mark. It swung for the fences. It looked for a grand slam, and I think instead it winds up being, a decent single or maybe a stretch double, because we're talking about baseball today. But I do like the movie very much because it's just really well made. It has a really strong, interesting premise and setup, but the execution and the messaging, it gets a little bit messy and winds up at the end being a mixed bag. And so it's a mixed bag that some people really liked, some people really hated, and I'd like to know which one were you. I'm probably on the really like side, but let me know in the comments below. Did you like it? Did you hate it? And the last extra credit movie we're talking about today is The Killing of a Sacred Deer. Killing of a Sacred Deer came out in 2017 and is a Yorgos Lanthimos movie. And he's a little bit more famous after Poor Things, but he is always giving us movies that are very challenging, very unique, very interesting, and sometimes kind of polarizing and difficult to watch. We talked about Dogtooth on the channel, which is absolutely fantastic. He's also very famous for The Lobster in addition to Poor Things. He's very well known now, but he still ain't going to be for everybody. He's a challenging filmmaker, but let's get into the movie. If you haven't seen it, the movie stars Colin Farrell as a surgeon and Nicole Kidman as his beautiful wife. He's very successful and he has children, very nice, idyllic life. And Barry Keoghan plays a young man who has some sort of weird history with Colin Farrell's character and is kind of threatening him to basically kind of do something to his family, or else some sort of secret might come out or something bad is going to happen. And there's a bit of a mystery tied into that kind of plays out as the movie goes on. And it's pretty dark and pretty macabre and pretty strange. And we're going to go ahead and stop there so as not to spoil the movie for you. It's a very strange movie. And it's strange for two reasons. One, because of a very strange, almost like supernatural or magical premise that is weird in a very grounded seeming movie. The idea of the movie, the doctor and everything like that, he's a surgeon, it seems very grounded, and then you have this premise that is kind of out there, a little bit out there. It's a little bit mysterious, a little bit strange, a little bit weird. The second thing about this movie that's very weird is how it's made. It's a very high concept film of trying to present a situation where the actors are not tipping off the audience on how they feel about the events that are transpiring. So they've been told to kind of rein in their performances and not emote too much. And they instead do this rather flat acting. And we've seen these actors in other movies. We know how good they are. Nicole Kidman, the underrated Scream Queen, we talk about her all the time. Colin Farrell does great work. Barry Keoghan does good work. We've talked about these people. We know they're good. And they're giving very strangely flat, almost alien performances intentionally. This is Yorgos Lanthimos really wanting to make the audience, force the audience into deciding for itself how it feels about the decisions that the different characters are making, which is really interesting. Whether or not it's successful is up for debate. I'd say yes, but I might be in the minority in this. There's a lot of people who dislike this movie because primarily of this acting style, this decision to make it feel incredibly cold and clinical. Clinical is the word I would use for this. It's a very clinical film. It is looking at this idea of your family's getting ill, they're in danger, and you've been told, given an ultimatum on how to fix the situation, but it's not a very good one. What do you do, and how does everybody react to that setup, to that premise? It's a really fascinating one, and the movie is forcing you to kind of put yourself into that situation, to sit with that. And again, I don't necessarily think it works for everybody. I don't think that people all grab to it. I think some people are just very off-put by the acting, but I also think that's a little intentional too. I think the movie wants to be off-putting. I think it wants to make you feel weird and uncomfortable. There's Alicia Silverstone in this movie playing a really uncomfortable role. And if you like Alicia Silverstone, which I do, if you like some Clueless, which I do, it's weird to see this. It's interesting to see how they've stripped away some of the typical like Hollywood movie making cues that they give you via music, via performance, via emotion, and taking that away from you and for kind of forcing you to navigate it without those typical cues that a movie gives you. I like that. I think it's a really cool, challenging, interesting, original idea, but even I can admit it doesn't always completely work. You've got these powerhouse actors, again, like Nicole Kidman, who can just deliver some gut-wrenching emotional performances, and then they're told not to do that. It's interesting because, wow, if they had been let loose to go emotionally, this movie could be really upsetting, really fantastic, really just blowing everybody's minds, but they decided not to go that way. It's an interesting choice. It's a bold choice. And it's not one that I think is necessarily a bad idea, but I also can understand why people don't feel like it's successful. It's kind of hard to explain it without you seeing it, but you'll know within the first 5-10 minutes of the movie what I'm talking about. If you haven't seen it, you turn it on, you're going to know right away, like, what the hell is this? Why are they talking that way? Why is the dialogue this way? And either you can roll with that or you can't. And if you can, you might as well just stop, because that whole movie is going to be like that. But I think it's worth sticking around. I do think that it's worth sticking around because the movie ends pretty crazy. The premise does go where it says it's going to go. It's not just kind of like a weird myth or like analogy or like some sort of allegory or something like that. It really is going there, and it's a strange movie that I felt rewarded for watching. I felt like the ending paid off the challenge of watching this movie and kind of trying to navigate it. But I know I'm not the majority on this one. I know that other people feel very differently about this, and I'm guessing some of you do too. So by all means, drop it in the comments. Tell us your problems with this one. I know that there's probably other issues that people have with this one, but this seems to be the biggest one. The performances seem to be a big challenge for people. Talk about it in the comments. This is one that definitely worth talking about. This is one that definitely is a conversation starter, which is why we had to talk about it here on the syllabus. I almost put it on the syllabus proper because it's just such a weird, noteworthy, interesting movie to talk about. But we're talking about it now. Let's continue that conversation in the comments. So that's A24. That's some of the movies that we hadn't already talked about that I felt had to be talked about because they're just so interesting. A24 almost never lets me down. Like, I haven't seen everything that they've released, but I've seen most of it, and really just like I just wind up loving those movies. And I'm not alone. I know a lot of people. I know a lot of you love those movies too, or at least like a lot of them. And maybe, like I said, some of these are polarizing. Some of these maybe you don't like them, but people are passionate about them. People have opinions about them. It's definitely worth talking about. A24 is a buzzworthy, interesting studio, and I hope they keep doing what they're doing because gives me some more stuff to talk about here on the channel. But right now we're going to talk about a Trivia Pursuit card. It's that time where I'm going to answer a question on camera, and as you know, I won't cut, so you guys can see if I answer it honestly. And we're going to let's look at the international category because Climax is a French film. So let's go ahead and go international because we don't get to do that very often, it seems, lately. So here's our question, international category. In 2006, The Host, the titular creature nabs which Park family member? Hyun-soo, Nam-ju, or Nam-il? And this is interesting for a couple of reasons. So we have talked about The Host on the channel. I love The Host. Bong Joon-ho, absolutely fantastic. I love that movie, and I talked about it pretty glowingly here on the channel. And I've seen it a few times because it's very good. And I, as you know, don't do well with character names. I just don't. And they're just not my thing. And that's the case here. However, they're giving us the names. And the names are Korean, and my Korean's rusty, so I am not so good with Korean names, to be honest with you. However, I've seen this movie multiple times. I even saw it for the channel. I even had to edit clips for the channel, and it's subtitled, which means you read the names, which helps me retain things a little better. Seeing a name is a little easier for me than just hearing a name. So I think I know the answer to this. I mean, I've got a 1 in 3 shot, right? So I've got 3 choices. I've got a 1 in 3 shot, so it's pretty good odds. It's not too bad. I mean, I'm technically taking a guess, but I feel like it's a bit of an educated guess. My gut is telling me one. When I read those 3 names, one of them leapt out to me. The other 2 did not. Here's the thing, though. Watch a lot of Korean horror movies. For the channel especially, I watch a lot of Korean horror movies. They are good. So is it possible that I'm remembering this name from a different movie? Yeah, it's possible. It's possible that I've got the wrong movie and the name is ringing a bell because it's similar to a name from another movie. So I might be wrong. And if you are a big fan of The Host and you know the movie, good for you. Like, lock in your answer. If you don't know and you're guessing like me, 1 in 3 shot, guys, pick one of the 3. I wish I could give you more hints in this, but I really can't. I can tell you what I'm going to pick, but lock in your answer first so you don't cheat and lock it in. I'm going to go now. So my answer is Hyun-soo. Hyunso is the name that sounded familiar to me. I feel like I've read it before. I feel like I've seen that word in text before, meaning I would have seen it in the subtitles. So Hyunso is my guess. Let's check the card. Hyunso! Hyunso, I got that one right. Yeah, it just leapt out to me. And again, I kind of started second guess myself. You could hear it. I was like, oh, maybe it's from a different movie. Maybe it's from The Wailing or something like that. And I didn't change my answer. Hyunso is the correct answer. I got that right. Did you get it right? Did you guess if you got it right? Or did you know? Did you remember it from the movie? Because I know a lot of you saw it. And it's just and if you haven't seen it, check it out. The Host. It's a monster movie and it's so good. It's so good. It's like all Korean movies, just mixing all those genres up. It's so good. So check that one out. And check out these movies from A24. If you haven't seen these movies, I'd recommend all of these movies. Some of them, like I said, a little bit challenging. Maybe do your research on it ahead of time. But really, really great movies. I would recommend every single one of them. Even the ones I didn't like as much, like Bodies, I'd still recommend it, honestly. So check these out and let me know what you think in the comments below. That's going to do it for this week's video. I appreciate you guys sticking around till the end. And I appreciate you guys watching and viewing and subscribing, all that stuff you guys have been doing, because it's making me feel loved enough to keep going. That's why I started the Horror Movie Supplement, so I can keep talking to you guys about movies. We're going to keep on going. Next week we'll have something completely different. But until then,